Yo guys, China is a fan favourite track and is a circuit which is incredibly fun to drive. And I think EA and Codemasters realised how fun this track is in the F1 games, which is why they've just added it to F1 22. Now, there are a fair few tricky corner sequences, including the very long turns 1, 2, 3 and 4. These long sweeping corners make China a track that's very hard on your tyres. Your left tyres in particular are very prone to overheating. There's a pretty good mixture of high-speed corners such as turns 7 and 8, along with some slower corners such as turns 6 and 14. And then there is the incredibly long back straight, where top speed is crucial if you want to have a good race. This combination of fast and slow corners, along with long straights, make the Chinese track a tricky one to create a car setup for. You will always be compromising on some part of your car setup. As with most of our F1 22 car setups, I've created a setup that focuses on stability first. You'll need a very balanced car, as a few of the longer corners can cause you to lose control of the rear if your car isn't set up right. And just to throw another variable into the mix, the Chinese track features a few curbs that are incredibly high. This means we'll have to run an extremely unusual ride height setup to ensure we don't bottom out or damage the underfloor of the car. I'm going to run through my best car setup for China in race conditions, and this setup isn't going to be a time trial setup. Instead, it'll be a car setup that gives you a comfortable car to drive for long distances in a race. It's very drivable and stable throughout a whole lap, even when your tyres are starting to wear, and it ensures you have good pace and straight line speed so you aren't mugged down that long back straight. So let's jump straight in and look at the aero setup first. If you've looked at any of the time trial setups, they all typically have a higher front wing than rear. This is because in time trial, you have a lot more grip at the rear of your car than you do during a race. I've gone the other way and increased the rear downforce slightly more than the front. This will help when accelerating through the fast corners such as turns 4, the S's of turns 7 and 8, and when accelerating out of the long sweep in turn 13. A focus on rear downforce won't compromise your straight line speed too much, so I've gone with a setup of 19 on the front wing and 21 on the rear. If you don't mind a slightly looser car, you can switch this round and go 21 on the front and 19 on the rear, but you will have a little less rear stability and slightly better front end turning. For the transmission, I've gone low on both on and off throttle diff settings. A low on throttle diff of 57% will help you get the power down easier out of the slower corners. It's very important to get good acceleration out of turns 13 and 14, and this on throttle diff setup will help with that. For the off throttle diff, I've lowered it right down to 50%. This will help with a little extra rotation at slower speed, which offsets some of the understeer that may come from our aero setup. The suspension geometry is a pretty standard setup. I did play about with it, reducing the camber to help with tyre temperatures, but this approach simply lost more lap time and didn't really recoup enough tyre temperature to be worth sticking with. So I've reverted back to a right, left approach. So go with -2.5 and -1 on the camber, and 0.05 and 0.2 on your toe setup. The suspension setup is where we really do a lot of our stability work. I've softened the suspension all round, giving you a very stable car. This will help both over curbs and with overall stability. I have run with a stiffer front suspension in ARB, which again will introduce a little understeer, but does help with stability. Go with 3 on the front suspension in ARB and 1 on the rear suspension in ARB. Then, for the ride height, I had to raise the car right up to the roof. There are 2 very aggressive curbs in particular that are very hard to avoid if you're pushing hard. The curbs on the exit of turns 10 and 13 will give you all sorts of trouble if you run a low ride height. They can even cause underfloor damage to your car. For this reason, I've raised the ride height up to 10 at the front and 9 at the rear. This gives you just enough clearance over these curbs to avoid too much disruption and damage. For the brakes, you should go with our normal approach. I've set the brake pressure to 100% and the brake bias to 50% and leave it there. And then for the tyre pressures, I've had to set them incredibly low. As I mentioned, China is a tyre killer. The long sweeping corners will destroy your tyres during a race, so we have to do everything we can to protect them. Reduce the front pressures as low as they'll go to 22.5 on both, and then run an offset rear tyre setup of 21.0 psi on the rear right tyre and 20.8 on the rear left. The front and rear left do take the most punishment around China, so this offset approach will help mitigate that a little bit. And that will round out our car setup for China in F1 22. I'm so glad this track's been added to F1 22 as it's one of my favourites to race around. And with this car setup, you'll be able to survive and dominate in longer distance races. As always, let me know in the comments below how you find this setup, whether you like this track and what setup approach you've taken. Also smash that like button and subscribe if you want more F1 22, F1 Manager and sim racing content. But for now guys, enjoy the track, enjoy the setup, and I'll see you out there.